Hi, everybody. There we go. All right. Not even a whiskey, and we're live. All right.
Good icebreaker.
So thank you for joining us at Warehouse Liquors tonight. Gene and the crew and Zach for hosting this party up here. We've been a big fan of Old Elk for a very long time, so we wanted to do something special up here to kick off Whiskey Week. Feel free to do the Mike Miller jazz hands when you say Whiskey Week. So obviously bringing Greg into town is a very big deal. When I got hired by Old Elk, I saw a Cincinnati phone number pop up on my phone. I usually don't answer those numbers, nothing against Cincinnati, but it wasn't somebody trying to talk to me about auto insurance. It was actually Greg welcoming me to the team. It's a very, very cool brand. I've been in whiskey for 20 years. It's about half as long as Greg, so I got some catching up to do. So the whiskey that we poured tonight that we're leading off with, I'll let Greg take it from here.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, thanks for having us here. Real pleasure. Been looking forward to it. How many folks are familiar with Old Elk? How many folks are familiar with Greg Metz? All right. Well, I have a starting point. So briefly, I'll just give you an overview of who I am, where I've been. Been in the business 46 years. I actually started right out of college, 1978. My background's chemical engineering. I'm a homeboy from Cincinnati and still reside in Cincinnati, actually. But anyway, 1978, the spring, I was graduating, and actually way back then, companies came to campus to recruit. And as it was, Joseph E. Seagram's and Sons was on campus looking to fill positions that they had open at their Lawrenceburg, Indiana facility, which today is known as the MGP distillery. So I went through the interviewing process, was lucky enough to been offered a position. 2 weeks later, I'm walking through the time office of its enormous distillery. I think it was the world's largest at that time. It's still probably top 5, but in any case, when I walked through the gate, I literally didn't even know what a master distiller was. The only thing I knew is that I was 23. I was going to work for a company that made whiskey, and I thought, well, that's pretty dang cool. So, 46 years later, it's still pretty dang cool. So the part that I didn't know was that I was going to get the best training in the world from Seagram's relative to becoming a master distiller. I achieved that position in 2002 and held it until 2016 when I left the distillery after 38 years to join up with Old Elk. I actually met Old Elk in 2012 when I was still master distiller in Lawrenceburg. And at that time, our owners, Kurt and Nancy Richardson, who are the founders of Otterbox phone covers, he's a very entrepreneurial person and enjoys starting companies from scratch and building them into something successful. And he decided that he wanted to do that in the bourbon world. And first thing he did after he made that decision was to look me up, in Lawrenceburg, knowing that I was the world's largest contract distiller at that point. And when he came, he said, we're really interested in having you produce whiskey for our brand, but we want to be different than everybody else. And we want you to craft custom mash bills specific to Old Elk brand. And I said, oh, that'd be wonderful. And the fact of the matter is that 36 years into my career, that was my first opportunity to actually build a mash bill from the ground up, unrestricted, relative to grain ratios, relative to grain types, and especially unrestricted relative to cost of the mash bill. And it was great. So the very first mash bill that I crafted for Old Elk is the one we're going to try first, Old Elk Flagship Bourbon. Kurt and Nancy gave me 2 words to work with when I crafted that mash bill. They said, Greg, we want our product to be smooth and easy. That was it. That was the end of the meeting. And so there I am, my first opportunity, like a kid in a candy store, over my hands. But really at that point, when the thrill and the smoke cleared, I really just leveraged my experience on how I was going to go about making that mash bill. And so I knew to get smooth and easy, I had to get the malted barley content way up. In the back of my mind, I knew, pardon me, that all of the other mash bills that I produced in my career to that point always had some degree of rye in it for a nice spice characteristic. And again, through experience, I knew that to get that character to follow through into the distillate, it takes a minimum of 15% rye in the mash bill. And once I had made those determinations, it really became reverse math. I took the corn content down to the minimum for a bourbon, which is 51%, factored in 15% rye for the spice note I was after, and that left me room for 34% malted barley. The highest barley content bourbon on the shelf anywhere. Everybody else's bourbon is going to be in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% malted barley. And again, one of the two things about Old Elk's DNA, the elevator pitch, first and foremost, world-class quality product. And second is being different than everybody else on the shelf. And we do that through our custom mash bills that I crafted for Kurt and Nancy. So as the event goes, I totally encourage any and all questions. The more questions, the better, because after the first couple of questions generate more questions, and pretty soon you've got the whole audience involved in a really nice night of entertainment and tasting. So absolutely geek out as much as you want. You can get as technical with your questions as you like.
How old is it? And then again, you're using questions because I don't know. How many years?
How old is what? The whiskey we're trying tonight? It's a minimum of 4, but what we're tasting tonight is likely to be 6 going on 7. So I think, again, I think with no further ado, we should get to the most important part and then let the questions come as they will. So again, this is a very high malted barley content bourbon mash bill, higher than anything else you'll find on the shelf. It's offered at 88 proof as a shelf product. That was intentional on my part. I wanted the proof to be in the premium category, but I didn't want it so high that it interfered with the smooth and easy characteristics that we work so hard to produce. So again, this is a less robust, less in your face bourbon than you might be used to. And that's attributed to the high malted barley content.
You all have one pretty different. Each one of the dump. There are a lot at 8 different grams per example.
Just as a reference point, when I talked earlier about being unrestricted relative to the cost of a mash bill, this is a perfect example. So corn is the most abundant cereal grain, and it's by far the cheapest cereal grain. And it also has the highest starch content of all cereal grains. And starch is the part that you can convert into alcohol. So that runs in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 a bushel. If you move up to the rye grain that's in this mash bill, that it has a lower starch content than corn, so you're going to get less proof gallons of alcohol per bushel, and it costs probably $8 to $10 a bushel. Then when you move up to the malted barley content, that's about $30 a bushel, and again, the starch content's lower than corn, so you're getting less yield, less proof gallons per bushel, and it's costing you 5, 6 times as much as corn. So again, this is a very expensive mash bill. It's built that way to hit the smooth and easy characteristics that Kurt and Nancy asked me to produce. And we actually do not pass that cost along to the consumer. So
What's the normal price?
the normal malted barley content for most bourbons is 5 to 10%. Oh,
This normally retails between 45 and 50, your normal shelf price.
well, I produced all this when I was master distiller in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. I produced between 3 custom mash bills that I produced for them. I also created a wheated bourbon mash bill, a wheat whiskey mash bill, which we'll try tonight. We've got a rye whiskey mash bill that's not custom the Old Elk, but it's the one we made famous in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. It's the 95% rye, 5% malt. We do have a small craft distillery in Fort Collins, but our business plan from the get-go was to establish the brand, build the brand, and then build the distillery. So we're only have been in market, it'll be 6 years this November. So we're very new to the market. And we're hoping to hit 100,000 cases this year. First year, I think we had $1 million of revenue. Last year we had about 22 million in revenue, and this year we're projecting growth to up to 35 million. So when we get the brand established and we get our sales established and our case volume established, then we'll start looking at building a distillery that'll maintain the brand for the future. But right now, it's all product that I produced when I was master distiller in Lawrenceburg. All the product that I produced is still aging there. I live in Cincinnati, so I call up the plant, give them a list of barrels that I want sampled. I evaluate all the barrels with sensory and organoleptic before I harvest them, send them to Fort Collins to make sure that the quality is good. I do all the blending out of the house. So when I decide I'm going to do a 4-grain blend or a infinity blend, I'll put together a list of the components that I want to use in those blends. I'll tell the distillery, what barrels I want sampled. Then I can put those blends together at the house. But ultimately, I dictate all the barrels.
So everyone
Recording
knows,
in progress.
as far as positioning, the Glencairn glass is gonna be our 4 grain. The Old Elk glass is going to be the double wheat. And we're starting. Right? Everyone you'd like to go with?
I'd say,
4 grain first?
yeah, I think we should do 4 grain first. So yeah, we've moved into our Master Series blend categories. And the really cool part about these blends is because the Old Elk mash bills being so different, so extreme, if you will, I was actually able to create mash bills within mash bills by blending them. And we even go to the degree of putting the composite mash bill on the side of the label. So the 4 grain we're going to try first is a blend of Old Elk flagship bourbon, high malted barley content bourbon, and Old Elk wheated bourbon, which is a very high wheat content wheat bourbon. That proof is 105.9, I believe. Sure, I'm telling you, right? Straight wheat. Oh, they're there.
Here's the 4 grain.
Yeah, I believe it's 105.9. So that basically is as a proof as the blend came out relative to the components that I put together. But in the 4 grain, the composite mash bill winds up being 51% corn, 22.5% wheat, 19% malted barley, 7.5% rye. So it's still a very nice blend of all the different grains that you can incorporate into a mash bill, and hence the 4 grain category.
So I actually had when I was doing a sampling, I had a master sommelier taste out this 4 grain whiskey. And I don't know if any of you have sat with the master sommelier, but they like to paint a very artistic picture with everything they're tasting. But his summary was too good to not steal. So he said that tasting our 4 grain was like watching the Kentucky Derby. All the flavors burst out on your palate at the same time, and they're all vying for first position. And it gets really chaotic. And just when you think one of them is going to pull away with the race, everything drops down a level and it's a totally different race. And it takes 2 to 3 minutes for it to totally dissipate on your palate. And it keeps changing every time it drops down another level. So it's definitely one that I had to steal, but like as you're tasting through it, as you're breathing in and out, it's subtly changing each time. So this is definitely a very active whiskey.
You think this would make you good mint julep?
No.
Like a very expensive mint julep.
Very affirmative no.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, this is an interesting note. So talking to the gentleman right there about blending when we broke up. So when I put these blends together, I have to decide, usually sales or marketing dictates, the type of blend that they're after for a given year. Once they tell me that, then I have to arrive at what blending components I'm going to use. And then I'll put together maybe 6 different ratios of those blending components and evaluate them blind and determine, which one I think is going to be the one. But I have to tell you, when I put them all together and I put them on the table, I've always got a preconceived idea based on the ratios of those blend components, which one I think is going to be the home run. And I'm 0 for 5. But I will tell you that I'm 1,000% that there's always been one in that group of 6 or 8, however many I put together. There's always one that stands out as the one. And I can't tell you why. Well, I can't tell you why, but I can't even explain. When it's like when you see it, you know it. I can't put a quantifiable determiner or determination on how I arrive at that, but there's always been one out of the 5. What have I done? 5. I've done 5 of these different blends in the last 2 years, and there's always been one that stands out as the one that strikes me as the one. So, but it's never been the one that I thought was going to be the one. And the reason is to finish that thought was that the blend components, as much as you think they'll marry up together, based on, you know, what they look like individually, and you think they'll blend up in the same ratios as they look individually, and they never do. And that's one of the reasons I made Seagram gin. All the Seagram gin in the world for years was all produced in Lawrenceburg. And of course, that gin recipe had probably 6 or 7 different botanicals in it. All those flavors come over at different times as they come off the still. And we always waited 12 hours after the distillation was done. We let those tanks sit for 12 hours before we look at them for quality. And that's to give it time for all those different flavors to marry up together for that period of time. So if you looked at them at 1 hour old or 2 hours old, it would be completely different than after letting them sit for a minimum of 12 hours. And the same thing's true when you make up these blends. And when I make them up, I look at them blind, and I'll make my notes, and I'll let them sit, and I'll look at them again maybe after lunch and do the same thing. And I might even let them sit overnight and do the same thing. And almost always the one that what I've also found is my initial whatever I think the first time through is what you just stick with. You don't want to overanalyze it. Almost always the first pass is usually the best pass.
What's the youngest whiskey in there?
Probably 6-year-old.
Yeah, 6-year-old straight, 7-year-old. Or sorry.
Yeah.
So the next one we're going to go to is the double wheat. Just so you know, you need the bottle, Greg?
Yeah, I was gonna
Okay.
just read off that composite blend ratio. Matter of interest. Or you can read it off. So the double wheat, again, that's sales and marketing said that we'd like to come out with a double wheat product. You know, you've seen some on the market. We're not first in the category, I don't think. But so anyway, we had, because our wheat whiskey and wheat bourbon mash bills are extreme, for lack of a better term. I was actually again able to blend and create a mash bill within a mash bill. So in this particular case, the composite ratio came out 71.5% corn. So it's a pretty high corn content. 71.5% wheat, sorry, 25% corn, 3.5% barley. So it created a really nice blend of those two custom old elk mash bills in our core categories. And the proof on this one.
Well, hold on. Let me get to that real quick, Greg.
Oh,
So, Greg alluded to the fact that sales and marketing
yeah.
asked for this one.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a reason for that. For some of you who are collectors, you've heard of a lot of other brands that are out there, and a lot of people are chasing after that perfect wheater, as it were, whether it's the Weller or the Pappies or the what have yous. Insert other allocated bourbon name there. We initially wanted to call this product the Wheater. Unfortunately, that name was taken. So this is actually called our double wheat because it is a combination of both our straight wheat whiskey and our wheated bourbon. But we are targeting a specific brand very wholeheartedly. So much so that the competitor we're going against comes in at 107 proof for their antique collection. Most of you know which one that is. Ours is 107.1 on purpose.
A little sport.
So, yeah.
There's some good
Yeah,
sport in that.
exactly.
True.
Yeah.
Very intentional.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Can you clear out the leg? Or the leg, eat with me. I really quick out. Can you talk?
Well, it's just got to do with the congeners that are in there, and they're primarily the longer chain alcohols that would be in there, like D-amyl and normal propanol and a whole host of other congeners that we would classify in the fusel oil category, which would technically be called a tailed component if you were going to strip them out. But yeah, it's got some nice stuff going on there.
Yeah, we're drinking right now, obviously out of the Bulldog glass. If you haven't already finished your Glencairn, feel free to either finish it or dump it. Whoever's coming around to fill the next one.
Anybody have a favorite yet?
Okay, great. Can you tell me about the smoke cut process?
Oh, yeah, good point. So, one of the other things that we do different than everybody else in the industry is we call it our slow cut proofing process. And that only applies to products that we reduce from barrel proof to bottling proof or shelf proof. So it doesn't apply to the single barrel programs, but certainly applies to our core categories. And what that means is rather than add the water all at once to reduce from barrel proof to bottling proof, which actually creates a heat reaction. It's a chemical reaction, literally, and it's called the Heaty reaction. But you're going from a higher energy state to a lower energy state, high proof to low proof. And when you do that, it releases heat back into your product. And if you do that in one big step, all that heat is released all in one big step. And it's actually enough to drive away some of the really delicate, high volatile congeners that you work so hard to create through the whole process. So what we do is rather than do it in one big step, we do it in many small steps. And what that does is limit the amount of heat that goes into the product in each given step, which help preserve those really delicate congeners. It's the same amount of water, start to finish, that everybody uses. It's the same amount of heat, start to finish, that everybody uses. But if you do it in incrementally small steps, the amount of heat is limited in each step, which helps preserve those congeners. Now, we didn't invent that process. We actually learned it from Nancy Fraley. But we certainly adopted a version of that at Old Elk. And, depending on what proof we have to move to and what proof we're moving from, that could be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks of cutting to limit the heat exposure to that product that might drive away some of those highly volatile components like aldehydes and ethyl acetates, which are flavor components that you want in your profile, but you don't want them in too high a levels that might be created by bad fermentation. But you certainly want those in your profile in the right amounts, and those would be the first components that would be driven off by adding heat back into your product. So yeah, great question.
Do you also mix it around as you're adding the water?
Oh,
to
yeah.
Evenly distribute it?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have mechanical agitators on our blending tanks. So we rely on circulation, pumping circulation. At Lawrenceburg, we used air agitation. We had spargers. We never had mechanical agitation on those tanks either, but we used air spargers, which requires a super high quality air from a special air compressor. But yeah, Fort Collins, we just recirculate in a loop, if you will, for a period of time, and then we let it rest, maybe a day, and then we'll do another reduction.
So water and Fort Collins also is water being added at Fort Collins or just
No, that's all done in Fort Collins. So all the really all the blending, all the proof reduction, all the bottling is done in Fort Collins. Yeah. And whenever you cut barrel proof to bottling proof, you use either distilled water or reverse osmosis treated water. So you have to strip out all the minerals and all the hardness to keep from having that separate out in your product.
Are you somebody who grants credence to the water matters in terms of where the water comes from, since you're going to
Oh,
treat it?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So does the Fort Collins water make a difference?
Rocky Mountain. Yeah. It's literally distilled water. I mean, it's rainwater that percolates down the Poudre Canyon River, you know, and then we'll do a filtration and a dechlorination at the plant. But the main thing about water is it has to be free of objectionable odors. So primarily sulfur and iron. That's probably the most two offensive components that could be in well water or whatever that absolutely would not go well in brewing or whiskey making.
So the Glencairn glass now has our wheat and rye product. So I'll let Greg dive into that one.
Yeah, so again, that's the third Master Series blend that I put together. That just came out this year recently, and that is a blend of our 95% rye mash bill and our 95% wheat whiskey mash bill.
It's right over there.
So in this instance, the composite grain ratio comes out 57.6% wheat, 38% rye. So it's got a nice rye kick to it, 4.4% malted barley.
I will say on this one, this is a whiskey that the first taste is going to confuse your palate in the biggest way, because these are two whiskeys that don't normally ever go together. Greg and I were discussing, we don't know anybody else who's put together a straight rye and a straight wheat at a 95.5 mash bill. So the first taste is going to confuse the heck out of you. The second one is going to be a roller coaster for your palate. It's literally going to come shooting up in the front with all the sweet tones you get out of the wheat whiskey. It's going to dive bomb down past the mid palate. You're literally going to taste nothing. And then the back of the palate comes roaring up with the rye. So try that one on for size the second time.
I think that 107.8 proof.
108.4.
108.4. Yes, sir. Ooh, pepper scares me. Don't say pepper. Really? That's a severe defect. Pepper aldehydes. Spicy is okay. Clove spice. Pepper aldehydes is like, you've probably heard the term old red eye, but back in the Wild West days, that was pepper aldehydes. It's a form of tear gas.
Okay, so it's not peppery, what it is.
To me, it's like a clove spice. Yeah, yeah,
The first thing that came to my mind,
yeah,
but it wasn't necessarily the right one.
yeah. You would know a pepper aldehyde. It'd be like an onion. It would bring tears to your eyes. But
Oh, we're on this one.
we had summer shutdowns every year at the plant, and we had a disruption right before the shutdown started, and they were normally like a 1 month shutdown. So the beer well, where we store all the fermented mash before it goes to the beer still, which normally gets emptied for a shutdown, wasn't able to be emptied, and we had to hold that vat of fermented mash for the whole 1 month shutdown. And when we turned the agitator on at startup to process that, it had developed pepper aldehydes, and you couldn't even be in the building. It brings tears to your eyes and burn your eyes so bad. So obviously a fermentation defect. Too old. Yeah.
It's 85. The single barrels are a little bit higher than that, just due to the higher proof. The last three that we tasted, the 4 grain, the double wheat, and the wheat and rye, all sit right at 99.99. And then this last one, the Infinity Blend, actually is 149.99. So
So Infinity Blend, if you're to the point of tasting that, we started that 2 years ago. Again, sales and marketing brought it to the table, said they thought it would really be cool to start our own Infinity Blend series. And what that implies is a perpetual blend. A lot of folks start their own at their house. When the bottle gets low, they'll re-pour and you know, make their own perpetual blend at their house. So we took a page out of that book and decided that we'd start our own Infinity Blend series. So we started, the first one was 2021. And each blend sort of has its own storyline, if you will. So the very first one was really based on lost my thought. Built on legacy and heritage. So the legacy part was my 5 years in the business at that time. And the heritage part was that we actually had some 11 and 12-year-old Kentucky bourbons in our inventory that we wanted to pay homage to in our Infinity Blend. So it was built around, I think at the time it was 6-year-old Colorado whiskey, Old Elk Colorado whiskey, as well as those older vintage Kentucky whiskeys. And then that first one was not an Infinity Blend because it was the beginning of the blend. But in 2022, early this year, we came out with the second Infinity Blend, which contains 18% of the 2021 blend. And then that blend was entirely different in the 2021. So
7-year-old straight bourbon, single wheat whiskey of all 12 and 13-year-old straight bourbons. We only have 114, one.
and then as recently as today at lunchtime, I got a hot poke in the ribs. Said, when are you going to start working on the Infinity 2022? Said, I better get moving. His timeline was a lot shorter than mine.
So are you going to keep about 18% each year or is it going to
I think that'll vary somewhat, but yeah, it'll always have enough to make it worthwhile. Put it that way. It's not going to be drops, you know. It's a very loose term in the business, but yeah, it'll be a substantial enough amount to make a difference. Yeah.
How many bottles of this are produced?
I believe we did 6,000 bottle runs, so they were like 3,000, 2,000 cases, but they were three pack cases.
So they're like 25 bottles now? So they sell like 240 bottles of sell.
if it's full, it depends how long it's been aging. So being that some of the Kentucky products were 12 and 13-year-old, some of those only had 20, 30% of the product left in there. Whereas some of the 7-year-old straight bourbon and wheat whiskeys, those were probably a lot more full, like only 15 to 20% down. Could have been a little bit more, but as far as the amount of total barrels, that would be more to the production team as to Greg put in the ratio. And then they had to find those barrels and say, let's dump them all. Let's figure it all out. So
That's certainly limited production runs. Very fun projects, however.
So
so some would say that, mash bills are proprietary secrets, right? And sometimes you list yours on the bottle. So, yeah. So why and who made that decision?
Well, we've always, as a company, have wanted to be transparent about everything. I mean, I think we sort of took a page out of High West book from years ago. David Perkins, if you're familiar with him, is probably one of the best blenders in the world, and made a great living out of it, made a great brand out of it, and he was always incredibly transparent about what he was doing. He wrote the story and put it right there on the label, and we took a page out of his book relative to being transparent. So,
And
yeah,
also,
you know,
it's also
mash
on the
bills.
website too. Everybody should know that the website is amazing because the mash bills are on their website too, and it's very
Yeah.
clear, and very obvious. It's
Yeah.
really transparent.
Mash bills are proprietary, but they're not. It's not something you can really patent. So if anybody can copy a mash bill, but I will tell you that, and we, as under Seagram, we actually tried as a business management plan to reproduce whiskeys that we're making in Lawrenceburg at our relay plant in Maryland, to the extent that we sent them the grain from Lawrenceburg, the water from Lawrenceburg, the equipment and all the Seagram distilleries was all similar, processes were all similar, but we found that you could not reproduce the same whiskey in Lawrenceburg that you could in Relay. And it has to do with the indigenous flora fauna is what they call it. But basically that boils down to airborne bacteria that live in different geographical locations due to climate and altitude and all that. So even if you wanted to copy somebody's mash bill, you would never reproduce the product unless you were doing it in the same geographic location.
So even on that note, I actually came from the Scotch whiskey industry, spent a lot of years working under the Pernod umbrella. And a lot of you guys have heard of a brand called the Glenlivet. A few years back, they actually wanted to expand their distillery because they needed more production capacity. And the one thing that they knew they had to be able to tap into was the same water source. And they literally made a replica still or distillery across the street, no further away than the parking lot across Wabash here. They made a replica distillery down to the dents and the stills. Everything was the same, with the exception of one thing: the pipe that was drawing up the water from the main water source. They couldn't go out to Lowe's or Menards or Home Depot and find the same mineral content buildup of a 200-year-old pipe of copper. And so even though they built that same distillery, they were like, well, it's not the same whiskey. They were making product and they couldn't get it to taste the same. So they literally turned that into a gift shop and built a side-by-side distillery next to the main one and had to move all those stills over to make the same water source piping in to be able to make the same whiskey. But even literally on the same property across the street, they couldn't do the same thing. So to Greg's point, to your question, we put it out there, and I'm not saying we're trying to boast, but go ahead and try and make it. Try and make it as good as try and make it as good as a man who has almost 50 years of distilling knowledge. He has fought against every, fire that could happen in a distillery. He's been able to mitigate so many different things. And some of you asked during the break, what do you think of all the craft distilleries popping up? They only know what they know. They don't know what they don't know. And it takes years of on the job training to get that kind of knowledge. It's work experience. He's a master craftsman at what he does. And we can put that same mash bill out there, and most people will never have the opportunity to make the quality that he's making. So, yes. True. Yeah.
I got a follow-up question to that. So in Fort Collins, you had the delay because of COVID. After how many years do you think you would have distilled products from Fort Collins that would meet your standards above it?
Well, I mean, if we broke ground today, it'd probably be 2 years before you would ring out the process. So probably 6 years from today, that'd be the minimum. So I'd say we're probably 2 years away from building a distillery.
We technically have some gin and vodka that did meet his criteria, but it's harder to find. You can find Dry Town gin downstairs, but we don't make it in big production runs. Our still is 125 barrels a year. Right?
Yeah, the craft
Yeah,
distillery was
craft distillery.
quite
So
small.
it's not making a whole lot of production, but technically we are distilling at that level to his quality. It's just not widely available. Yeah.
Good answer. We're a good team.
Are there, what other questions do we have? Yeah.
Yep.
Can I give him
You say when you taste other people's whiskeys, you're tasting for defects, and you can tell if something was good or bad before you taste it. How many like products on the shelf today are made with defects? And there's some of them like lean into that. Like that's part of the flavor profile they choose.
I don't see, I think it's, more of a rarity, that you'll pick up. I would say probably in the craft arena, it's probably more prevalent than in the national arena, if you will. You know, we're not the only high quality whiskey on the market for sure. And we would never, I think the beauty of this industry is I don't think anybody thinks they're the best. I tell people a lot, I think, it's really, the industry is really pretty cool because as much as we're competitors day in, day out, we're also family, day in, day out. And I think overall feel of the industry is that there's room for everybody. But to answer your question, I think it's probably more prevalent in the craft arena than it is in the bigger player arenas. Because all those folks have been through it and they have been around a long time and they have it figured out as well. But, I think probably the defects that I've talked about today are probably more prevalent at the craft level.
Do you think that lends then to the craft level having more? They hit more home runs, but they get more strikeouts, as it were.
I think the real curse for the craft arena, and we were able to avoid that at Old Elk because of our ownership. Kurt and Nancy Richardson gave us the financial backing and the latitude of doing it, waiting till it was ready. I think generally speaking, most of the craft folks are forced to put their product, their bourbons or their whiskeys on the market before they're ready, before they're old enough. And that's an instant curse. If you're a upstart craft distillery and you put your bourbon on the market at 3 years old, it's going to fail. You can't rush Mother Nature, and you can't put a young whiskey on the market at any price and expect people to enjoy it. And that's for most of the craft arena. They need the cash flow. They get forced into launching their brand early. It puts a bad taste in the consumer's mouth, and they won't go back. And pretty soon their brand's hurting, and pretty soon they're out of business, and all that. So we've we're in the craft arena, but we had the very good fortune of having ownership that allowed us to do it right, and that's a luxury. Most folks do not have that, and it's like anything. If you're going to do it right, you have to have the right tools. You have to have the knowledge. You have to have a lot of things to really and bring something good to the table. And it doesn't matter if it's whiskey or building houses or flying to the moon. You have to have the right stuff.
In Fort Collins, is there like a tasting room, visitor center?
Oh yeah,
Visit Fort Collins, what would they consider?
it's called the Reserve at Old Elk. It's Old Elk's tasting room. It's world class, and it's right in the middle of historic downtown Fort Collins. If you're ever there, I highly recommend a stop. And they actually will taste you on products that aren't necessarily in market yet. So they will sample you on everything that we've got in our portfolio, but may not even be in market yet.
We do also offer tours at our facility, our bottling and our plant facility. We also sell single barrels out of there. If you decide to come out to Fort Collins and you want to buy a single barrel, literally everything is for sale. I mean that wholeheartedly. We have stuff available there that we do not put out to the rest of the country. Our weeded bourbon single barrels, like the one that Gene has here, he is literally the only person in the country that had samples come to him. So it's unbelievably rare that he has that. But we are only offering those if people come out to Fort Collins. And then on top of that, we've had people walking through on a single barrel tour where they go, "Ooh, what's that?" And we let's pull it down. So we do, and if they like it, they can buy it. So everything is for sale, and I say that wholeheartedly once again. So if you guys are interested in buying as a group, feel free to connect with Eric or myself, and we can definitely coordinate things to get you out there. And we do try and make sure everybody has a good time. So quick housekeeping note just for everybody, just so you know, the Old Elk Glass and the Pour Spout are yours to take home. So thank you.
And, we also want to, thank and acknowledge and let the staff from Warehouse Office before that, let's talk with this round of applause, Brett. And, in addition to Greg and of course, Ross for being here as well, I really want to thank, our friend Eric Rosentreater.